My name is Olivia Chen, and for 6 years I secretly worked double shifts and saved every penny for my future while watching my parents drain my college fund to pay for my sister's extravagant wedding. They thought I'd just accept it and move on. They never saw what was coming next. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Another double shift, Olivia? That's the fourth one this week, my manager Rick said, concern evident in his furrowed brow as he handed me the updated schedule. You know I appreciate your work ethic, but when was the last time you took a day off? I managed a tired smile as I tucked the schedule into my bag. I'm fine, Rick. Really, I need the hours. The same response I'd given for the past 6 years, ever since I turned 18 and realized I needed to take control of my own future. My coworkers at Hamilton Medical Center had their theories about my relentless work schedule. Some thought I was paying off massive student loans. Others whispered that I must be supporting a family member with an expensive illness. A few even speculated that I was funding some secret adventure, saving for a grand tour of Europe or a down payment on a beach house. None of them knew the truth. How could they? I barely acknowledged it to myself. The truth was both simpler and more complicated. I was rebuilding what had been taken from me. As I changed out of my scrubs at the end of my 12-hour shift, my phone buzzed with a message from my mother. Don't forget, Ellie's final wedding dress fitting tomorrow at 3. She wants everyone there for the reveal. I sighed, texting back a quick confirmation, even as I mentally calculated how little sleep I would get between my night shift and this family obligation. My sister Eliana's wedding had consumed our family for the past 18 months. Every TUR conversation, every family gathering, every financial decision revolving around her perfect day. The drive to my small apartment took 20 minutes, the familiar route allowing my mind to wander back to that day 6 years ago when everything changed. I had just turned 18, excited to start my senior year of high school and finalizing my college applications. Princeton had been my dream since childhood, the school my late grandfather had attended, the institution he spoke of with such reverence. He had established college funds for both Eliana and me when we were born, adding to them every birthday and Christmas until his passing when I was 12. It's your future, he would tell us, his eyes twinkling. Education opens doors that nothing else can. I had believed him. I had counted on those funds, carefully watching them grow over the years, calculating what I would need for tuition, planning my course of study in international relations. Princeton wasn't just a dream. It was my destiny, carefully laid out and prepared for. Until that August evening when my parents sat me down at our kitchen table. Olivia, we need to talk about your college fund, my father had begun, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. My mother jumped in, her words coming in a rush. Ellie and Jason have set their wedding date for next summer, and with Jason's family contributing so little, we're facing some difficult decisions. I remember staring at them, confusion giving way to a creeping sense of dread. What does Ellie's wedding have to do with my college fund? The uncomfortable glance my parents exchanged told me everything before they even spoke. We've had to reallocate some of your college money, my father said finally. Ellie's wedding venue required a substantial deposit, and with the catering and flowers. How much? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Another glance between them. About half, my mother admitted. Half. 50% of my future, redirected to pay for a single day of celebration for my sister. We'll find a way to replace it, my father assured me quickly. Maybe not in time for your freshman year, but eventually. You can start at community college, save money living at home. Princeton has always been a bit of a reach anyway, my mother added, as if that somehow softened the blow. Ellie needs this now. Her wedding is happening now. College can wait. I remember nodding mutely, too shocked to argue, too hurt to cry. Later that night, I pulled up the balance of my college fund online, a privilege I'd gained when I turned 18. Half was indeed gone, transferred out just days earlier. What my parents didn't tell me then, what I would discover 3 months later, was that the half they took would soon become all. By December, the entirety of my college fund had been drained, financing everything from Eliana's designer dress to the luxury honeymoon in Bali that my parents insisted on providing, as a surprise gift to the happy couple. My Princeton acceptance letter arrived in March, a thick envelope filled with congratulations and promises of a bright future. I smiled for the obligatory photos, accepted the excited hugs from my parents and their assurances that we'll figure something out, all while knowing the truth. There was nothing to figure out. The money was gone. That night, alone in my room, I made a decision. I wouldn't rage against my parents' betrayal. I wouldn't weep over lost opportunities. I would rebuild, quietly, methodically, without anyone else's help or interference. I graduated high school with honors, smiling through the ceremony as relatives asked about my college plans. Taking a gap year, I told them smoothly. Working. To save money first. The gap year became 2, then 3, then 6. I started as an orderly at Hamilton Medical Center, working every available shift, volunteering for holidays and weekends. I lived on the bare minimum, renting a tiny studio apartment and saving every possible penny. When opportunities for overtime or extra training arose, I seized them, eventually working my way up to a certified nursing assistant position with better pay. My life became a careful calculation of hours worked versus dollars saved. I created complex spreadsheets tracking my progress toward my goal. Not just replacing my stolen college fund, but building something more, a future entirely of my own making. My parents didn't understand my dedication to work. "You're missing the best years of your life," my mother would lament whenever I missed a family gathering due to my schedule. "All work and no play makes for a dull existence," my father would pontificate on the rare occasions I made it home for dinner. Meanwhile, Eliana and Jason settled into married life in the suburban home our parents had helped them purchase as a wedding gift. Their lives unfolded in a series of perfectly curated social media posts, exotic vacations, designer furniture, the birth of their son Noah 2 years after the wedding. My nephew was adorable, his chubby cheeks and contagious giggle the highlight of the family dinners I occasionally attended. "When are you going to start living your life, Liv?" Eliana asked during one such dinner as she showed off photos from their recent trip to Hawaii. "You can't work forever. Don't you want what Jason and I have?" I smiled and passed the potatoes. "Everyone's path is different," I said simply. What I didn't say was that I was living my life, deliberately, purposefully, with a clarity of vision that grew stronger with each deposit to my carefully hidden savings account. I didn't just want what had been taken from me. I wanted more. 6 years of sacrifice, 6 years of silent determination, 6 years of watching my family assume I had accepted my role as the practical, dutiful daughter, while Eliana remained the shining star around whom our family orbited. As I unlocked my apartment door after another exhausting shift, I checked my banking app, a ritual that had become almost meditative. The balance stared back at me. 203,467, 89. More than enough for what I had planned. Tomorrow, after Eliana's dress fitting, I would finally set things in motion. 6 years of patience was about to pay off in ways my family could never anticipate. Not with rage or recrimination, but with something far more powerful. The future. I had built for myself, by myself. I crawled into bed, setting my alarm for just 5 hours later, smiling at the thought of what was to come. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't about getting even, it's about getting ahead. The bridal boutique was exactly what you'd expect from an establishment calling itself Eternal Elegance. All cream-colored velvet furniture, champagne flutes that never seemed to empty, and strategically placed lighting designed to make even the most self-conscious bride feel like royalty. I arrived at 2:55 p.m., having rushed home to shower and change after my night shift, and found my mother and Eliana's 3 bridesmaids already settled on the plush sofa, cooing over something. On my sister's phone, "Olivia, you made it!" my mother exclaimed, gesturing for me to join them. Ellie was just showing us photos of the final floral arrangements. The roses are being imported from Ecuador. They're this magnificent blush color that matches the bridesmaids' dresses perfectly. I smiled politely as I took the only available seat, a small velvet stool slightly removed from the main gathering area. Sounds beautiful. They cost a fortune, Eliana sighed dramatically. But Jason says I deserve nothing but the best. What neither of them mentioned was the check my parents had written just last week to cover those imported roses. A fact I knew only because my mother had called to reschedule our monthly dinner, explaining that they were a bit stretched thin after covering some unexpected wedding upgrades. "Where is the bride-to-be?" The boutique owner trilled as she emerged from the back room. "We have everything ready for the final fitting." Eliana handed her phone to our mother and disappeared behind a curtain of tulle and promises. The bridesmaids, all friends from Eliana's sorority days, immediately launched into a detailed discussion of their own dresses and the bachelorette party planned for the following weekend in Las Vegas. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "You're not going to Vegas, are you, Olivia?" one of them asked, her tone suggesting she already knew the answer. "I have to work," I replied simply, the same response I'd given when the invitation first arrived. What I didn't mention was that I had voluntarily picked up 3 extra shifts that weekend, adding another significant deposit to my growing fund. "Always working," my mother sighed, shaking her head slightly. "You know, your father and I worry about you. All work and no play isn't healthy." I bit back the response that instantly formed in my mind, that their concern for my work-life balance hadn't stopped them from redirecting my entire educational future toward Eliana's wedding. Instead, I smiled. "I enjoy what I do. But you could have done so much more," she continued, oblivious to the irony of her words. "Remember how you always talked about becoming a diplomat? Working at the United Nations? What happened to that ambitious girl?" She was betrayed by the people, who should have protected her future, I thought. She learned that dreams require more than just talent and hard work. They require resources that can be taken away in an instant if you trust the wrong people. "Plans change," I said instead. "I've found other ambitions." My mother might have pressed further, but at that moment, Eliana emerged in her wedding dress, and all attention immediately redirected to where it belonged in our family dynamics, squarely on my sister. The dress was undeniably stunning, a cascade of hand-beaded lace and silk that probably cost more than a semester at Princeton. Eliana turned slowly, the boutique's lighting catching every crystal and pearl sewn into the fabric. "It's perfect," my mother whispered, tears forming in her eyes. The bridesmaids erupted in appropriate gasps and exclamations. I added my own compliments, genuine despite everything. Eliana did look beautiful, and her happiness was radiant. I had long ago separated my feelings about the situation from my feelings toward my sister. This wasn't Eliana's fault. Not entirely. She had been raised to believe that her desires were priorities, that her dreams deserved immediate fulfillment, while others could wait. "What do you think, Liv?" Eliana asked, catching my eye in the mirror. There was a hint of something in her expression. Not quite guilt, but perhaps awareness that her joy had come partially at my expense. "You look incredible," I said honestly. "Jason won't know what hit him." She smiled, relief evident in her face. "That's exactly what I'm going for." After the fitting concluded with a round of champagne, which I declined, citing my need to drive, My mother cornered me near the boutique entrance. "We'd love to see you at dinner on Sunday," she said, her tone casual but her eyes watchful. "Your father was saying just yesterday how much he misses having both his girls at the table." Family dinners had become increasingly rare for me, not just because of my work schedule, but because of the effort it took to maintain my calm facade around my parents. Every time I sat at their dining table, I couldn't help but calculate how many Princeton tuition payments their new furniture or kitchen renovation had cost me. "I'll try," I promised non-committally. "My schedule's pretty tight this week." My mother's smile tightened slightly. "It's always tight, Olivia. Family should be a priority too, you know." The irony of her statement hit me like a physical blow. I took a deep breath before responding. "You're right, Mom. Family should be a priority." Something in my tone must have registered because she looked momentarily uncomfortable. "Well, try to make it if you can. Ellie and Jason are bringing Noah, and you know how much he adores his Aunt Liv." That was true, at least. My 3-year-old nephew was possibly the only uncomplicated relationship in my life. His affection was simple and honest, untainted by the complex history between the adults in the family. "For Noah, I'll do my best," I conceded. As I drove away from the boutique, I made a detour instead of heading straight home to sleep before my next shift. 20 minutes later, I parked outside an imposing stone building on Commonwealth Avenue, the offices of Gardner Educational Consulting. The receptionist greeted me by name as I entered. "Ms. Chen, right on time. Ms. Gardner's expecting you." Rebecca Gardner had built her reputation helping non-traditional students navigate the complex process of college admissions and financial planning. I had been working with her for nearly 8 months, ever since I realized I was approaching my financial target. Her office was warm and inviting, walls lined with diplomas and thank you notes from successful clients. Rebecca rose to greet me, her handshake firm and confident. "Olivia, good to see you. I have excellent news." She gestured for me to take a seat as she returned to her chair and pulled up a document on her computer. "I've received responses from all 5 universities we applied to." My heart quickened. "And?" "Acceptances from all 5, with significant scholarship offers from 3. Her smile widened. "Including a half-tuition merit scholarship from Georgetown's School of Foreign Service." Georgetown. Not Princeton, but in many ways a better fit for my current goals and circumstances. Their School of Foreign Service was elite, their connections to diplomatic corps unparalleled, and, most importantly, they had an exceptional program for mature students with professional experience. The scholarship combined with your savings means you can complete the 4-year program without loans, Rebecca continued. And your work experience at the hospital has positioned you perfectly for their global health policy concentration. I let the news sink in. 6 years of sacrifice, of double shifts and missed family events, of living in a tiny apartment and eating ramen more often than I cared to admit. All of it had led to this moment. Not just replacing what had been taken, but creating something better, a future entirely of my own design. "There's one other thing," Rebecca said, her expression turning serious. "Georgetown's program begins in August. That's just 3 months away. Are you prepared to make that transition so quickly?" 3 months. Long enough to give proper notice at work, to find a subletter for my apartment, to make all necessary arrangements. But also just weeks after Eliana's second wedding, the vow renewal ceremony she and Jason had planned for their 5th anniversary, which my parents were once again funding lavishly. "I'm ready," I said with absolute certainty. More than ready. As I left Rebecca's office, I felt lighter than I had in years. The path forward was clear now, concrete in a way it hadn't been even with all my careful planning and saving. I had done more than just recover from betrayal. I had created an opportunity that was entirely mine, untouchable by anyone else's priorities or decisions. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Dinner Sunday at 6. Please come, your father." and I have something important to discuss. I considered ignoring it, as I had many similar messages over the years. But something told me to accept this invitation. Perhaps a desire for closure, or maybe simple curiosity about what they considered important enough to emphasize. "I'll be there," I typed back. The next few days passed in a productive blur. I spoke with my supervisor at the hospital about my departure, updated my resume, and began researching housing options in Washington, D.C. Each task felt like another step toward freedom, toward the future I had built for myself. By Sunday evening, when I pulled into my parents' driveway, I felt centered and calm in a way I hadn't experienced in their presence for years. Whatever important matter they wanted to discuss, it couldn't touch what I had accomplished or what lay ahead. The familiar house looked the same as always, meticulously maintained colonial, with perfectly trimmed hedges and seasonal flowers in coordinated colors. My father's pride in his home was evident in every architectural detail and landscaping choice. I remembered how, years ago, he had explained to me that maintaining a beautiful home was an investment in our family's reputation and future. I wondered briefly what he would say if he knew I had invested in something far more substantial than appearances. As I reached for the doorbell, I reminded myself of something Rebecca Gardner had told me during our first meeting. "Your history shapes you, but it doesn't define your future unless you let it." Tonight, sitting across from the people who had altered my path so dramatically, I would remember that my future was now entirely my own. And in 3 months, that future would begin in earnest, whether my family understood my choices or not. The aroma of my mother's signature rosemary chicken filled the house as I stepped through the front door. Sunday dinners at the Chen household followed a predictable pattern established years ago. Appetizers in the living room, dinner at precisely 6:30, and conversation that inevitably centered around Eliana's latest achievements or little Noah's developmental milestones. "Aunt Liv!" Noah came barreling down the hallway, launching himself into my arms with complete trust that I would catch him. I scooped him up, his 3-year-old giggles momentarily dispersing the tension I always carried into this house. "There's my favorite nephew," I said, settling him on my hip. "Have you grown another foot since I saw you last?" "I grew this much," he declared seriously, holding his thumb and index finger about an inch apart. "Impressive," I nodded with equal seriousness. "At this rate, you'll be taller than your dad by Christmas." Eliana appeared in the hallway, looking effortlessly elegant in a casual maxi dress that probably cost more than my entire monthly food budget. "Finally decided to grace us with your presence?" The words could have been biting, but her tone was light, almost conciliatory. "Work's been busy," I said, my standard explanation for my absence from family gatherings. She rolled her eyes but smiled. "Always the dedicated one. Come on, Mom and Dad are in the living room with Jason. Dad's trying to convince him to invest in some new tech stock." I set Noah down, and he immediately grabbed my hand, pulling me toward the living room. My father sat in his usual armchair, gesturing animatedly as he spoke to Jason, who nodded with the practiced patience of someone who had learned to navigate his father-in-law's enthusiasms. My mother arranged a cheese platter on the coffee table, her movements precise and deliberate. "Olivia," my father stood, surprising me with the warmth of his greeting. "It's good to see you. It's been too long." "Work schedule," I said, accepting his brief hug. "Always working," my mother echoed, embracing me more fully. "But you're here now, and that's what matters." There was something different in the IME atmosphere, a barely perceptible shift in how they interacted with me. Usually, my presence at family gatherings was acknowledged, but quickly overshadowed by attention to Eliana and her family. Tonight, I felt their eyes lingering on me, their questions more engaged than perfunctory. "Wine?" My father held up a bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon. "Just water for me," I replied. "I have an early shift tomorrow." Dinner progressed with the usual updates. Eliana's part-time interior design business had landed a new client. Jason's marketing firm was pitching to a major sportswear company. Noah had said something precocious at daycare that impressed his teachers. I listened and responded appropriately, waiting for whatever important matter my parents had mentioned. It wasn't until dessert, my mother's apple tart, that my father cleared his throat in the way that always signaled a shift to serious conversation. "Olivia, your mother and I have been doing some thinking," he began, setting down his dessert fork. "About your future." I tensed involuntarily. The last time they had discussed my future, half my college fund had disappeared. "What about it?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. My mother reached over to pat my hand. "We know how hard you've been working these past years, always taking extra shifts, never taking vacations. We're concerned," my father added, "about the path you're on." I carefully set down my own fork, suddenly very aware of everyone's attention focused solely on me, an unusual experience in this household. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm content with my choices." "But that's just it," my mother said, leaning forward slightly. "Are they really choices if they're forced by circumstances? By financial necessity?" The irony of her question nearly made me laugh. Who had created those circumstances, if not them? "What are you getting at?" I asked directly. My father exchanged a glance with my mother before continuing. "We've been setting aside some money for the past few years. Not as much as we would have liked, but a substantial amount. For Noah's education," I assumed aloud. "No." My father shook his head. "For you, Olivia." The room seemed to still around me. Even Noah, usually squirming in his booster seat, by dessert time, sensed the shift in energy and watched quietly. "For me?" I repeated, unsure I had heard correctly. My mother's eyes held an emotion I couldn't immediately identify, something between guilt and hope. "We know we diverted your college fund for Ellie's wedding. At the time, it seemed like the right decision. Ellie was getting married and college could wait. But we've come to realize that wasn't fair to you," my father continued. "You've worked so hard taking care of everyone else's needs. It's time someone took care of yours." I sat perfectly still, processing their words. After 6 years of silence on the matter, after countless family gatherings where my sacrificed education went unmentioned, while Eliana's wedding was celebrated as the event of the decade, they had suddenly developed a conscience. "How much?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. $40,000, my father answered promptly. "Not enough for an Ivy League education, of course, but enough to get you started at a good state school. You could finally pursue that international relations degree you always wanted." 40,000. A fraction of what they had taken, offered now as though it were a generous gift rather than partial restitution. I took a sip of water, buying time to compose my response. "That's very thoughtful," I finally said. "May I ask what prompted this reconsideration?" Another glance between my parents. It was Eliana who answered, surprising me. "That was me, actually," she said, meeting my eyes directly. "I was going through some old photos and found that picture of you at your high school graduation, the one where you're holding your Princeton acceptance letter." She paused, seeming to choose her next words carefully. "You looked so happy. Live, so full of possibilities. And I realized, I don't think I've seen you look like that since that day." I remembered that photo vividly, my smile genuine, unaware that the acceptance I held so proudly was already impossible to fulfill. "I asked Mom and Dad what happened with Princeton," Eliana continued. "Why you never went. They told me about using your college fund for my wedding. I had no idea, Liv, I swear." The sincerity in her voice was impossible to dismiss. In our family dynamic, I had always assumed Eliana was fully aware of and complicit in the redirection of my educational funding. The realization that she had been as uninformed as I was unwilling yielded complex emotions I wasn't prepared to process in this moment. So this is… what? Restitution? Guilt money? I asked, addressing my parents directly. My father winced at the bluntness of my question. We prefer to think of it as setting things right. Better late than never. And we're truly sorry. Olivia? My mother added, reaching for my hand again. I allowed the contact, but didn't return the squeeze she gave. We made a choice that prioritized one daughter's immediate happiness over the other's future. We've come to see how wrong that was. I looked around the table at their expectant faces, my parents hopeful for absolution, Eliana genuinely remorseful, Jason politely interested, and Noah blissfully unaware of the undercurrents swirling around his dessert. 6 years ago, this offer would have meant everything to me. Now, it was a fraction of what I had already accomplished on my own. I appreciate the gesture, I said finally, and the acknowledgement. Both are meaningful. My mother's expression brightened with relief. Then you'll accept? You'll go back to school? This was the opening I hadn't anticipated receiving tonight, but now that it had presented itself, I knew exactly what to do with it. Actually, I said, setting down my napkin beside my plate, I've been meaning to share some news of my own. 4 pairs of eyes focused on me with varying degrees of interest and concern. I've been accepted to Georgetown's School of Foreign Service with a half-tuition merit scholarship. The words came out with quiet pride, factual rather than boastful. The stunned silence that followed was broken by Jason, who recovered first. Georgetown? That's impressive, Olivia. Congratulations. My mother's confusion was evident. But how? When did you apply? How are you paying for it? I applied 8 months ago, I explained calmly. As for funding, between my scholarship and my savings, I'm fully covered. Savings? My father's brow furrowed. From your hospital job? 6 years of double shifts and minimal expenses add up, I said simply. I've saved enough for tuition, housing, and living expenses for the entire program. Eliana stared at me, understanding dawning in her expression. That's why you've been working so much. All these years, you were saving for college. I nodded. Among other things. Why didn't you tell us? My mother asked, hurt evident in her voice. The question sparked something inside me. Not anger exactly, but a need for honesty that had been suppressed for too long. Because the last time my education was discussed at this table, it was deemed less important than a wedding, I said quietly. I decided my dreams would be safer if I kept them to myself. My father flinched as though I'd struck him. Olivia, we never meant… I know, I interrupted gently. You never meant to harm my future. You just made choices that did. An uncomfortable silence settled over the table, broken only by Noah asking if he could be excused to play with his toys. Jason quickly granted permission, and the 3-year-old scrambled down from his chair, oblivious to the tension he was leaving behind. When do you start? Eliana finally asked. August, I replied. I'm giving notice at the hospital next week. My mother dabbed at her eyes with her napkin. Washington, D.C. That's so far away. It's where I need to be for the program, I explained, and for the internship opportunities afterward. You've thought of everything, my father said, a note of something like respect in his voice. I had to, I answered, simply. No one else was going to plan my future for me. The weight of those words hung in the air, a truth too evident to deny. For a moment, no one spoke, each processing the implications of what I had shared. Then my father straightened, in his chair, decision evident in his posture. The $40,000, it's still yours. Use it for living expenses, for graduate school afterward, for whatever you need. It won't make up for what we took, but it's a start. I studied his face, seeing genuine remorse there. The The money wouldn't change my plans. Those were set in motion regardless. But his acknowledgement held value beyond the financial. "Thank you," I said finally. "I accept." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a step toward something new, something honest between us. As I looked around at my family's faces, I realized that while they had once defined my limitations, they had inadvertently pushed me toward a strength and independence I might never have discovered otherwise. In trying to contain me, they had forced me to grow beyond what any of us had imagined possible. The weeks following the Sunday dinner revelation passed in a whirlwind of preparations. I submitted my formal resignation at Hamilton Medical Center, where my supervisor expressed genuine disappointment at losing me, but offered enthusiastic support for my educational pursuits. My coworkers organized a farewell gathering where several confessed they had wondered what drove my relentless work ethic all these years. "I always thought you were saving for some exotic round-the-world trip," confessed Aisha, a fellow nursing assistant who had become something of a friend during our shared night shifts. "Education makes much more sense for someone like you." "Someone like me?" I asked, curious about how others perceived me after years of keeping my true ambitions private. "Focused, methodical, always thinking 3 steps ahead," she explained. "Some people work hard because they have to. You always worked like you were building something." Her observation touched me. Even when I'd revealed nothing of my plans, my purpose had been visible to those paying attention. The apartment I'd called home for 6 years, a studio with barely enough room for a bed and small table, took mere hours to pack up. I had accumulated few possessions during my years of aggressive saving, a minimalism born of necessity that had become a habit I expected to carry forward. I donated most of my furniture to a women's shelter downtown, keeping only my laptop, clothes, books, and a few sentimental items. The lightness of my material footprint seemed appropriate for the transition ahead, a life unburdened by the weight of unnecessary attachments. My parents invited me to dinner again the week before my planned departure for Washington, D.C. Unlike the tentative atmosphere of our previous gathering, this invitation came with explicit purpose. They wanted to properly send me off with their blessing. The gesture, while appreciated, highlighted how much had changed between us in such a short time. "We've set up a transfer for the funds we promised," my father informed me as we sat in their living room before dinner. "It should be in your account by tomorrow morning." I nodded my acknowledgement. "Thank you." "And I've been researching housing options in Georgetown," my mother added eagerly, handing me a folder filled with printouts of apartment listings. "These are all within walking distance of campus. The safety ratings are excellent, and several have flexible lease terms." Her enthusiasm was both touching and slightly overwhelming. After years of managing every aspect of my life independently, having my parents suddenly involved in my planning felt like an intrusion, albeit a well-intentioned one. "I've actually already secured housing," I told them gently. "A 2-bedroom apartment about 15 minutes from campus by bus. I'll be sharing with another incoming graduate student. Her name is May. She's from California and studying international economics." "Oh." My mother's disappointment was palpable. "I didn't realize you'd already." "That's wonderful. Of course." "I've been planning this move for nearly a year," I reminded her softly. "Long before I knew about your offer." An uncomfortable silence descended, broken by the timer in the kitchen announcing that dinner was ready. As we moved to the dining table, I realized how deeply ingrained our family dynamic remained despite recent revelations. My parents still expected to guide and direct. I still instinctively asserted my independence. Halfway through the meal, my father cleared his throat, his habitual signal that he was about to address something significant. "Your mother and I have been discussing your situation," he began, carefully selecting his words. "We realize that our actions created a breach of trust between us." I continued eating, neither confirming nor denying his assessment. "We'd like to make amends beyond the financial aspect," he continued, "but we're not entirely sure how to do that." The vulnerability in his admission caught me off guard. My father, always certain of his decisions and directions, was acknowledging not just a mistake but uncertainty about how to fix it. I set down my fork, giving his question the consideration it deserved. "I think trust is rebuilt through actions over time," I finally said. "It's not something that can be fixed with a single conversation or gesture." My mother reached across the table, not quite touching my hand, but extending hers in a gesture of connection. "We want to be part of your journey, Olivia. Not controlling it, but supporting it. If you'll let us." The sincerity in her eyes made something shift within me. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the beginning of a path toward it. "I'd like that," I admitted. "But it will take time for me to fully trust your support. 6 years of adjustment doesn't disappear overnight." "We understand," my father said, though his slight frown suggested he was still coming to terms with the consequences of decisions made years ago. "We'll follow your lead." The conversation shifted to more practical matters: my course schedule, the professors I'd be studying under, the internship opportunities I hoped to pursue. For perhaps the first time in my adult life, I found myself the center of my parents' genuine interest and attention. The sensation was both disorienting and oddly healing. Eliana called the next day, asking if she could stop by my apartment before I finished packing. When she arrived, Noah in tow, I was surprised to see her carrying a large, flat package wrapped in simple brown paper. "A going-away present," she explained, setting it against the wall while Noah explored my nearly empty apartment with the boundless curiosity of a 3-year-old. Though going away sounds so permanent, I prefer to think of it as a new beginning gift. I unwrapped the package carefully, revealing a framed map of Washington, D.C., beautifully illustrated in an antique style with landmarks and neighborhoods highlighted in gold leaf. "It's stunning," I said truthfully, running my fingers over the textured paper. "I thought you could hang it in your new place," Eliana said, a hint of uncertainty in her voice. "As a reminder that even in a new city, you're still connected to us, to family." The thoughtfulness of the gift touched me. It acknowledged my journey forward while offering a thread of connection to what I was leaving behind. "Thank you," I said simply. "I'll cherish it." Eliana hesitated, then spoke in a rush. "I've been thinking a lot about everything. About the wedding, the money, all of it. I had no idea they'd used your college fund, Liv. If I had known—" "You didn't know," I confirmed, sparing her the need to complete the thought. "I never blamed you for their decisions." "But I should have asked questions," she insisted. "All those years you were working double shifts while I was planning renovations and vacations. I never stopped to wonder how you were really doing. What kind of sister does that make me?" The rawness of her self-recrimination surprised me. In our family's dynamic, Eliana had always been the golden child, confident in her centrality. Seeing her question her role revealed a capacity for self-reflection I hadn't fully credited her with. "The kind who was raised to believe her dreams came first," I answered honestly. "We were both shaped by the same family system, Ellie. You adapted to it one way, I another." Noah interrupted our conversation by announcing the discovery of a small toy car I'd kept on my bookshelf, a souvenir from the only vacation I'd allowed myself during my years of saving, a weekend trip to Cape Cod with friends from work. "You can have it, buddy," I told him, smiling as his face lit up with disproportionate joy at such a small gift. "That's the difference between us," Eliana said quietly, watching her son. "You've always been generous even when you had little to give. I took abundantly without noticing others might be going without." "We're not that different," I countered, surprising myself with the realization as I spoke it. "We both know what we want and pursue it determinedly." The difference is in what we value. She nodded slowly. I'm proud of you, you know. What you've accomplished on your own, it's extraordinary. Coming from Eliana, whose approval I'd stopped seeking years ago, the words held unexpected weight. Not because I needed her validation, but because they represented a fundamental shift in how she saw me. No longer as the practical, dutiful sister who existed in her shadow, but as someone who had charted her own remarkable course. Thank you, I said simply. Will you stay in touch? She asked, vulnerability evident in her tone. Really stay in touch, not just holiday cards and occasional texts. I considered her question seriously. Our relationship had been defined by an imbalance that extended beyond our parents' financial favoritism, an emotional economy where Eliana received while I accommodated. Any future connection would need to exist on more equal terms. I'd like to build something new between us, I said carefully. Something based on who we are now, not the roles we fell into growing up. Relief and something like hope crossed. Her features. I'd like that too. As they prepared to leave, Noah wrapped his arms around my legs in a fierce hug. Will you come back and visit, Aunt Liv? He asked, looking up at me with complete trust. I knelt to his level, meeting his earnest gaze. Of course I will. And maybe someday you can visit me in Washington. There's a really cool museum with dinosaurs and rockets you might like. His eyes widened at this tantalizing prospect. Promise? Promise, I affirmed, ruffling his hair. After they left, I stood in my empty apartment, the framed map leaning against the wall, my past and future juxtaposed. In tangible form, 6 years ago, when I'd first moved into this small space with nothing but determination and pain, I couldn't have imagined the moment I now inhabited, on the threshold of the education I'd worked for, with a family slowly awakening to their role in my journey and a sense of purpose that had only strengthened through adversity. The path ahead would hold its own challenges. Georgetown's program was rigorous, the competition fierce, the expectations high. Washington was an expensive city, and even with my savings and my parents' contribution, financial vigilance would remain necessary. Building a new social and professional network would require energy and vulnerability. But standing amid the empty space that had witnessed 6 years of my quiet revolution, I felt a profound certainty. Whatever challenges awaited, I had already proven my capacity to overcome them. The strength forged through necessity had become my most valuable asset. Not merely resilience, but a confident self-reliance that no circumstance could diminish. As the afternoon light slanted through my bare windows, I carefully wrapped Eliana's gift in bubble wrap and placed it in the single suitcase containing the possessions I deemed essential for my new beginning. Tomorrow, I would board a train to Washington, D.C., leaving behind not just an apartment and a job, but a chapter of my life defined by reaction to others' choices. The chapter ahead would be written entirely in my own hand, a story of creation rather than compensation, of possibilities pursued rather than limitations accepted. The stolen college fund that had once seemed like the end of my dreams had become instead the catalyst for a journey far more meaningful than my 18-year-old self could have imagined. Sometimes, I reflected as I took one last look around, the space that had sheltered my transformation. The greatest gift lies not in what we're given, but in what we discover we can accomplish when everything is taken away. Washington, D.C. in August greeted me with oppressive humidity and endless possibility. As my taxi navigated through the historic streets toward my new apartment in the Adams Morgan neighborhood, I watched the iconic landmarks pass by. The Washington Monument rising like an exclamation point against the blue sky, the dignified dome of the Capitol building, the stately facades of embassies representing nations from every continent. This city, with its global significance and corridors of power, would be my home for the next 2 years. My new apartment occupied the second floor of a converted brownstone on a tree-lined street. The building had character, slightly worn hardwood, floors, tall windows that allowed generous light, and built-in bookshelves that awaited the academic volumes I would soon acquire. As promised, my roommate May had already arrived and claimed the slightly smaller bedroom that faced the back garden. "Olivia!" She greeted me warmly, helping with my single suitcase. We had spoken several times via video call while arranging our housing, but meeting in person cemented my impression of her as both brilliant and grounded. "How was your journey?" "Transformative," I answered truthfully. The train ride from Boston to Washington had given me hours to reflect on the profound shift I was making, not just geographically but existentially. With each mile of track that carried me southward, I had felt the weight of my past lightening, my focus sharpening on what lay ahead rather than what I was leaving behind. May nodded as though she understood completely. Beginnings should feel that way. I brought some celebratory tea, my grandmother's special oolong that she only shares for significant life events. "Would you like some while you settle in?" That first evening established the tone of our roommate relationship, respectful of each other's space but genuinely interested in each other's journeys. Over tea served in delicate cups May had carefully transported from San Francisco, we exchanged condensed versions of the paths that had brought us to Georgetown. Her story involved immigrant parents who had sacrificed everything for her education, expectations of family excellence that had both motivated and constrained her, and her own quiet rebellion in choosing international economics over the medical career her parents had envisioned. "And you?" she asked after sharing her narrative. "What brings you to Georgetown at 26 instead of 22 like most of our classmates?" The question was asked without judgment, simply acknowledging the statistical reality that most graduate students in our program had proceeded directly from undergraduate studies. I considered how much to share, then decided on honesty without bitterness. "My family redirected my college fund to other priorities when I was 18, I explained, keeping my tone matter-of-fact. "I spent the past 6 years working and saving to create my own opportunity." May studied me with newfound respect. 6 years of single-minded focus toward one goal. That's remarkable commitment. Most people would have given up or settled for something less. "Giving up wasn't an option," I said simply, "and settling wasn't in my nature." "Then Georgetown is lucky to have you," she declared, raising her teacup in a small toast. "To those who make their own way." The following week brought orientation. For the School of Foreign Service, a whirlwind of introductions, campus tours, faculty presentations, and administrative requirements. The program cohort consisted of 97 students representing 23 countries and diverse professional backgrounds. At 26, I fell somewhere in the middle of the age range. Not the youngest, but far from the oldest. Professor Elena Vasquez, director of the Global Health Policy concentration I had selected, spoke on the second day of orientation. Her presentation captivated me immediately. Not just her impressive credentials as former health advisor to multiple UN agencies, but her clear-eyed vision of how health diplomacy could reshape international relations in a post-pandemic world. "Global health is not charity," she stated emphatically, her gaze sweeping across the auditorium. "It is strategic imperative, moral obligation, and diplomatic opportunity merged into one critical domain. Those who master this intersection will shape policy for generations to come." After her presentation, I joined the small group of students who approached her with questions. When my turn came, I introduced myself and asked about the connection between her fieldwork in Southeast Asian refugee camps and the policy recommendations she had subsequently developed for the World Health Organization. Her eyes sharpened with interest. "That's an astute connection, Ms. Chen. Most people focus on either the field experience or the policy outcomes, rarely the translation between the two." She glanced at her watch. I have office hours tomorrow at 2 p.m. if you'd like to continue this conversation. The next day, our discussion extended well beyond the scheduled 30-minute appointment. Professor Vasquez was both brilliant and pragmatic, challenging my thinking while validating my instincts about where health policy was most needed. Your background in healthcare gives you a perspective many policy students lack, she noted toward the end of our conversation. How long did you work at the hospital? 6 years, I replied. Primarily in emergency and geriatric care. She nodded thoughtfully. I'm leading a research project on cross-cultural approaches to elder care policy. It's early stages yet, but I'll be selecting 2 research assistants by the end of September. You should apply. The invitation, casual yet potentially significant, was the first tangible indication that my unconventional path might offer advantages rather than just delays. My years at Hamilton Medical Center, which I had viewed primarily as necessary sacrifice for my ultimate goal, suddenly appeared in a new light. As valuable experience that distinguished me from classmates who had proceeded directly from undergraduate theory to graduate analysis without practical application between. Classes began the following Monday, launching me into an intellectual environment more stimulating than anything I had experienced before. The coursework was demanding. International economic theory, diplomatic history, quantitative analysis, for policy design, and specialized seminars in my concentration area. The reading load alone would have overwhelmed me had I not developed disciplined study habits during my years of night shifts and online courses. What struck me most powerfully in those first weeks was the contrast between my current reality and what might have been. Had my parents honored their commitment to my education, I would have completed a Princeton undergraduate degree 4 years earlier. I might already be established in an entry-level diplomatic position, or perhaps pursuing this same graduate degree with less life experience informing my perspective. Whether that alternative path would have been better or worse was impossible to determine, but one thing became increasingly clear. The journey I had actually traveled had forged capabilities I might never have developed otherwise. My classmates, many from privileged backgrounds with uninterrupted educational trajectories, often struggled with the program's intensity and the requirement to produce practical applications from theoretical frameworks. For me, after 6 years of solving real-world problems with limited resources in high-pressure healthcare environments, the academic challenges felt manageable by comparison. Where others saw overwhelming complexity in policy case studies, I recognized patterns from my direct experience with systems and their human impacts. 3 weeks into the semester, I received an unexpected email from my mother. Dear Olivia, your father and I have been thinking about you constantly since you left. The house feels different without knowing you're just across the city. I hope that doesn't sound too sentimental. I know you need your independence now more than ever. We wondered if you might be willing to send us your course schedule and perhaps share what you're learning. Not to check up on you, but because we realize how little we know about your interests and ambitions. All these years, we thought we understood what drove you. But your revelation at dinner showed us how much we've missed. Eliana mentioned that Noah asks about you nearly every day, when you'll visit or when he can see the dinosaur museum you promised. Jason suggested that perhaps we could all visit Washington during Noah's school break in November, but only if that wouldn't disrupt your studies. Your room here remains exactly as you left it, not because we expect you to return to it, but as a reminder that you always have a place here, whenever and however you might want it. With love and admiration, Mom. I read the email twice, noting the careful respect for boundaries, the absence of expectations, the tentative offerings of connection, on new terms. It represented a significant shift from the assumptions and directives that had characterized my parents' communication in the past. That evening, as May and I prepared dinner in our small kitchen, a ritual we had established to ensure we ate properly despite our demanding schedules, I mentioned my family's potential November visit. You should show them the campus, May suggested, deftly chopping vegetables for our stir-fry. Let them see what their money helped create. I paused in the act of measuring rice. Their contribution came after I'd already secured my place. Here. This, I gestured to encompass our apartment, the university beyond, my new life. I built myself. May smiled knowingly. Exactly. Let them see what you accomplished while they were focused elsewhere. Not as punishment, but as education. Her perspective challenged me. I had been accustomed to compartmentalizing my family and my ambitions, keeping the latter protected from the former's potential interference. The idea of intentionally integrating these spheres, of allowing my parents to witness rather than just hear about my new reality, felt both vulnerable and potentially powerful. Later that night, I replied to my mother's email. I attached my course schedule, briefly described my professors and classmates, and confirmed that a November visit would be welcome. I ended with a simple truth. I'm exactly where I need to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do. It took longer than expected to get here, but perhaps the journey was necessary preparation for the destination. As I pressed send, I realized something fundamental had shifted within me. The anger and resentment I had carried for 6 years, sometimes acknowledged, often suppressed, had begun to transform into something more nuanced. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of integration, the ability to incorporate my family's actions and their consequences into a coherent narrative of my own becoming. The path forward was increasingly clear, not just academically and professionally, but emotionally. The strength I had developed through necessity was not diminished by reconciliation. If anything, choosing connection from a position of independence only demonstrated the fullness of my transformation. That night, I hung Eliana's map of Washington, D.C. on the wall above my desk, my first real decoration in the new apartment. The golden landmarks gleamed in the lamplight, cartographic symbols of institutions and ideals that had drawn ambitious minds to this city for generations. My place among them had been hard-won, carved from determination rather than bestowed by privilege. As I traced the winding representation of the Potomac River with my finger, I reflected that some journeys are meaningful not despite their detours, but because of them. The road I had traveled to this moment, with its unexpected obstacles and self-constructed bridges, had shaped me in ways a direct path never could have. 6 years ago, standing in my parents' kitchen as they explained why my education would be sacrificed for my sister's wedding, I had felt powerless. Tonight, surrounded by textbooks detailing global health policies and diplomatic strategies, I recognized the profound truth. What had seemed like the end of my dreams had merely been the beginning of a more significant journey, one that taught me the immeasurable value of creating what others would not provide. Early October brought crisp autumn air to Washington, D.C., transforming the city's abundant trees into a spectacular display of crimson and gold. Campus life had settled into a demanding but manageable rhythm as midterm examinations approached. I had established efficient study routines, productive relationships with professors, and a small but diverse circle of classmates with whom I regularly collaborated on group projects. Professor Vasquez's research assistant application was due on the first Friday of October. The position required a formal letter of interest, curriculum vitae, academic transcript, and a 5-page analysis of a current elder care policy challenge facing an international organization. I selected the World Health Organization's struggle to establish cross-cultural standards for elder care in refugee populations, a topic that drew upon both my healthcare experience and my growing policy expertise. "You've been working on that application for 3 consecutive evenings," May observed as I refined my analysis at our small dining table. "Is this position particularly competitive?" Professor Vasquez mentioned receiving 48 inquiries. After her initial announcement, I replied without looking up from my laptop. Only 23 students submitted formal applications. "Those aren't terrible odds," May noted. 2 positions from 23 candidates, nearly a 9% acceptance rate. I smiled at her economist's instinct to quantify everything. The statistics matter less than the opportunity. Professor Vasquez's research could influence WHO policy frameworks for the next decade. Being part of that foundation-setting work would be invaluable for my career trajectory. And the stipend wouldn't hurt either, May added practically. She wasn't wrong. While my careful financial planning had ensured I could complete my degree without additional income, the research position offered a modest stipend that would provide welcome flexibility in my budget. More importantly, it would add a prestigious credential to my resume and potentially open doors to international organizations where I hope to work after graduation. On the submission deadline, I delivered my completed application to Professor Vasquez's department assistant, who added it to a substantial stack of folders on her desk. Professor Vasquez will review all applications this weekend, she informed. Candidates selected for interviews will be notified by Monday afternoon. The weekend passed with an intensity that left little time for anxiety about the position. I had 2 major papers due the following week, plus a group presentation for my international organization seminar. By Sunday evening, when I finally emerged from the university library after 8 hours of concentrated work, the research application had receded to the background of my thoughts. Monday morning brought an unexpected email from my father. Olivia, I've been thinking about our November visit and realized it might be helpful to know more about your academic focus. Your mother shared your course schedule, but I'd like to understand the substance of what you're studying if you're willing to enlighten your old man. In my corporate life, I've had some peripheral involvement with international health initiatives through our company's foundation. Mostly ceremonial board positions. Nothing substantive, but it's given me a glimpse into how complex global health governance can be. If there are particular readings or resources you'd recommend for someone wanting to better understand your field, I'd appreciate the guidance. I'd like our conversations during our visit to be more meaningful than my asking generic questions about how classes are going. Your mom sends her love, as do Ellie and Noah. The Dinosaur Museum is mentioned daily in our house now. With pride, Dad. The email surprised me with its thoughtfulness and humility. My father, always confident in his expertise on financial matters, was acknowledging his limited understanding of my chosen field and explicitly asking for my guidance. This reversal of our traditional dynamic, from him instructing me to him seeking my knowledge, represented a significant shift in how he perceived me. I drafted a careful response, recommending several accessible books that explained global health governance without requiring specialized background knowledge. I added brief annotations explaining why each selection was valuable and how it connected to current policy debates. The act of curating this reading list for my father felt strangely empowering, a small but meaningful acknowledgement of my developing expertise. That afternoon, as I exited my economic development seminar, my phone vibrated with an email notification. Professor Vasquez's name in the sender field sent a jolt of anticipation through me. The message was brief. Ms. Chen, I would like to discuss your research assistant application. Are you available tomorrow at 3 p.m. in my office? Elena Vasquez, PhD Professor of Global Health Policy, Georgetown University. I immediately confirmed my availability, then texted May with the news. Her response was characteristically direct. Not surprising. Your healthcare experience gives you an edge. Prepare to discuss how your hands-on work informs your policy perspective. May's suggestion proved prescient. When I arrived at Professor Vasquez's office the following afternoon, I found not just the professor, but also Dr. Marcus Abayomi, a visiting scholar from the World Health Organization, whom I recognized from a recent campus lecture series. Ms. Chen, Professor Vasquez greeted me. Thank you for coming. I believe you're familiar with Dr. Abayomi's work on standardizing elder care protocols across cultural contexts. Yes, of course, I replied, maintaining my composure despite The unexpected presence of a global health authority whose research I had cited multiple times in my application essay. His comparative analysis of filial responsibility laws in East Asian and Western European healthcare systems was foundational to my understanding of how cultural values shape policy implementation. Dr. Abayomi nodded appreciatively. Professor Vasquez tells me you bring practical healthcare experience to your policy studies. That's refreshingly uncommon in this field. What followed was less an interview than an intense discussion of elder care challenges across cultural boundaries. I found myself drawing extensively on my experiences with diverse patient populations at Hamilton Medical Center, connecting anecdotal observations to broader policy implications. What struck me most working with elderly patients was how radically different their expectations were depending on their cultural background, I explained. First-generation immigrants often experience profound distress when institutional care conflicted with their traditional values around family-based aging. Yet their American-raised children frequently lack the resources or physical space to provide the home-based care their parents expected. Precisely the tension our research aims to address, Dr. Abayomi confirmed. Healthcare systems designed around Western individualism often fail patients from communal cultures, while systems that assume extended family support networks struggle with demographic realities of globalization and migration. Professor Vasquez observed our exchange with evident approval. Olivia's application essay proposed an interesting framework for categorizing elder care approaches based on their adaptability to cultural variation rather than their base cultural assumptions. It's an inversion of how we typically approach cross-cultural policy design. The conversation continued for nearly an hour, far exceeding the scheduled 30-minute interview. As we concluded, Professor Vasquez walked me to the door with a warm smile. "We'll be making our final decisions by the end of the week," she said. "But I want you to know that your perspective today was exactly what this research project needs, the bridge between theoretical frameworks and lived human experience." I floated rather than walked back to my apartment, energized by the intellectual engagement and cautiously optimistic about my prospects. Regardless of the outcome, the interview itself had validated my unconventional path. My years of practical experience had provided insights that purely academic preparation could not have generated. Thursday afternoon, a new email from Professor Vasquez appeared in my inbox. "Dear Olivia, I am pleased to offer you the position of research assistant on our cross-cultural elder care policy project, effective immediately through the end of the academic year, with possibility of extension. Dr. Abayomi and I were particularly impressed with your ability to translate complex policy concepts into practical implementation considerations. This skill, rare among early career policy analysts, will be invaluable as we develop frameworks designed for real-world application across diverse healthcare systems. Please review the attached details regarding responsibilities, schedule, and compensation. If the terms are acceptable, we can formalize the arrangement during our first project meeting next Tuesday at 2 p.m. I look forward to working with you on this important initiative. Sincerely, Elena Vasquez, Ph.D. The significance of this opportunity extended far beyond the practical benefits of the stipend or even the professional credential. It represented the first tangible validation that my years of working in healthcare, years I had viewed primarily as a means to an educational end, had intrinsic value for my new career path. The detour that had delayed my academic progress had simultaneously provided me with insights and experiences that my traditionally tracked peers lacked. That evening, I shared the news with May over celebratory takeout from our favorite Vietnamese restaurant. "This calls for the special occasion tea again," she declared, retrieving her grandmother's prized oolong from its careful storage. As we sipped the fragrant brew from delicate cups, May raised an interesting question. "Have you told your family about this opportunity?" I hesitated. "Not yet. I just received the confirmation today." "Will you?" she pressed gently. The question gave me pause. For years, I had compartmentalized my achievements, keeping them private partially from habit and partially from a lingering sense that sharing them with my family would somehow diminish their value, as though their approval might retroactively claim credit for successes they had not supported. I think I will, I decided, not seeking their approval, but as part of creating a more honest relationship. They should know who I've become. That night, I composed a brief email to my parents, copying Eliana, describing the research position and its significance in straightforward terms without either minimizing or exaggerating its importance. I explained how my healthcare experience had proven unexpectedly valuable in the academic setting and mentioned that the project might involve presentation opportunities at international conferences in the coming year. The responses arrived the following morning. My mother's effusive with pride, my father's more restrained but clearly impressed, and Eliana's containing genuine congratulations alongside a humorous note that Noah wanted to know if this meant I was doctor for old people now. Their reactions, while gratifying, mattered less than the act of sharing itself, a small step toward a more authentic relationship built on who we were now, rather than who we had been. As October progressed, my life expanded to accommodate new dimensions: rigorous coursework, research responsibilities, and the gradual reconstruction of family bonds on more equitable terms. The approaching November visit, once a source of ambivalence, now represented an opportunity to integrate these elements of my life, rather than keeping them carefully separated. 6 years earlier, when my educational path had been abruptly derailed, I could never have envisioned this outcome, not just pursuing the education I had always wanted, but doing so with enhanced capabilities and clearer purpose born from the very detour I had resented. The financial betrayal that had seemed to limit my possibilities had ultimately expanded them in ways I was only beginning to fully appreciate. One evening, as I reviewed elder care policies from 5 different countries for the research project, I came across a Japanese concept that resonated deeply. Kintsugi, the art of repairing broken pottery with gold, creating something more beautiful and valuable than the original unbroken piece. The metaphor seemed perfectly aligned with my experience. What had been broken in my life had been reassembled with the gold of resilience, determination, and self-reliance, creating a stronger, more distinctive whole. Perhaps, I reflected as, I made notes for the upcoming research team meeting. The most valuable education hadn't occurred in classrooms at all, but in the crucible of necessity where I had discovered capacities I might never have developed on a smoother path. November arrived with a dramatic shift in the Washington, D.C. landscape. The vibrant autumn foliage that had adorned the city gave way to bare branches against steel-gray skies, while a persistent chill settled over the National Mall and surrounding neighborhoods. Campus life intensified as end-of-semester deadlines approached, creating a palpable atmosphere of academic pressure among the student body. The research project with Professor Vasquez had proven intellectually stimulating and surprisingly practical. Our team, consisting of Professor Vasquez, Dr. Abayomi, myself, and Javier Mendoza, a second-year student specializing in healthcare economics, had established a productive workflow that capitalized on each member's strengths. My role frequently involved analyzing how proposed policy frameworks would translate into frontline healthcare delivery, drawing directly on my years of hospital experience. Olivia brings the reality check, Professor Vasquez commented during one team meeting after I identified several implementation challenges in a proposed protocol. Theory meets practice, and practice usually wins. As my family's visit approached, I found myself experiencing unexpected anticipation. The apartment May and I shared, while modest, had gradually transformed into a comfortable home that reflected our academic pursuits and cultural backgrounds. My bedroom now featured not only Eliana's map, but also framed photographs of significant DC landmarks I had visited, carefully selected textbooks arranged by subject on the built-in shelves, and a small collection of global health policy reports, from various international organizations that I referenced regularly for my research. May, observing my preparations for the visit, offered an insightful perspective. "You're creating evidence of your life here," she noted, as I arranged my desk more meticulously than usual. "Physical proof of your transformation." Her observation was accurate. Without fully articulating it to myself, I was constructing a visual narrative of my new identity: scholar, researcher, future diplomat, for my family to witness directly rather than merely hear about from a distance. The evening before their arrival, I received a text from Eliana. "Noah packed his dinosaur books to show you. He's been talking nonstop about seeing his smart aunt and the T-Rex. Fair warning, dinosaur facts will dominate all conversations." The message made me smile. My nephew's enthusiasm for paleontology represented the purest form of connection in our family dynamic, untainted by the complicated history between the adults, focused entirely on shared curiosity and affection. My parents' flight arrived mid-morning on Friday. I had arranged to meet them at their hotel in Foggy Bottom, a comfortable property within walking distance of both the National Mall museums and Georgetown's campus. As I approached the lobby, I spotted them immediately, my father checking them in at the reception desk, while my mother adjusted Noah's jacket and Eliana examined a brochure about local attractions. Noah saw me first. "Aunt Liv!" he shouted. Breaking free from his grandmother's ministrations to race across the lobby, I knelt to receive his enthusiastic embrace, genuinely touched by his unrestrained joy at seeing me. "There's my favorite paleontologist," I greeted him, accepting the dinosaur book he immediately thrust toward me. "I see you brought research materials." "It has all the carnivores," he informed me solemnly. "The meat-eaters are the most interesting ones." My mother approached next, her expression a mixture of delight and tentative uncertainty, as though still navigating the new boundaries of our relationship. "Olivia," she said warmly, embracing me with more restraint than Noah but evident affection, "you look wonderful. Academic life clearly suits you." My father followed, his customary self-assurance tempered with a new awareness that I registered immediately. "There she is," he said, briefly squeezing my shoulder, his typical substitute for a full embrace, the scholar in her natural habitat. Eliana completed the family circle, giving me a genuine hug. "The last time I saw DC was on a high school trip," she commented. "I remember hating how much walking was involved. Now I'm excited to see it through adult eyes, especially with such a knowledgeable guide." I had carefully planned the weekend to balance family time with showcasing my new life. Friday would focus on Noah's priority, the Natural History Museum with its dinosaur hall, followed by dinner at a casual restaurant near their hotel. Saturday morning would include a tour of Georgetown's campus, lunch with May, and an afternoon allowing my parents to explore the monuments while Eliana, Noah, and I visited the Air and Space Museum. Sunday would bring brunch before their afternoon departure. The Dinosaur Museum expedition proved more enjoyable than I had anticipated. Noah's enthusiasm was contagious, and his encyclopedic knowledge of prehistoric creatures impressed even the museum docents who overheard his detailed explanations. "He gets his intelligence from both sides of the family," my mother commented. As we watched Noah press his face against the glass protecting a triceratops skull, his expression rapt with wonder. "Some traits definitely run in families," I agreed neutrally. My father, who had been relatively quiet during our museum exploration, suddenly asked, "Did you visit these museums when you first arrived in Washington, or were you too busy with academics?" The question revealed genuine curiosity about aspects of my life he hadn't witnessed. "I made time for the major sites during my first month," I explained. "Understanding a city's cultural institutions helps connect you to its identity. The museums here aren't just tourist attractions. They're part of how Washington sees itself and presents its values to visitors." He nodded thoughtfully. "That's a diplomatic perspective I wouldn't have considered. You're already thinking like someone in your field." His observation, delivered without his usual instructive tone, acknowledged my developing professional identity in a way that felt genuinely respectful. The subtle shift in how he engaged with me, as an adult with specialized knowledge rather than a daughter to be guided, marked a significant evolution in our relationship. Dinner that evening flowed more naturally than our previous family gatherings. Noah's dinosaur adventures provided initial conversation material, but gradually the discussion expanded to include my coursework, the research project, and even my parents' and Eliana's activities back home. "Dad's been reading those books you recommended," Eliana revealed as we waited for dessert. "The global health policy ones. He brings them up at the most random times. Jason and I were having dinner with them last week, and suddenly we're discussing comparative healthcare systems in Scandinavia versus Southeast Asia." My father looked momentarily embarrassed, then acknowledged, "The material is fascinating, complex but important. The book on diplomatic approaches to epidemic response was particularly enlightening, especially given what we all experienced during the pandemic." "I'm impressed you tackled that one," I said sincerely. "It's considered graduate-level reading even in my program." "Well, I had to look up quite a few terms," he admitted with uncharacteristic humility. "But it helped me understand what you're studying in a way that our previous conversations never quite achieved." His effort to educate himself about my field represented more than intellectual curiosity. It was an attempt to bridge the disconnect that had characterized our relationship for years. By investing time in understanding my academic world, he was demonstrating respect for my chosen path in a tangible, meaningful way. The following morning brought clear skies and milder temperatures as I led my family through Georgetown's historic campus. I showed them the buildings where I attended classes, the library where I spent countless hours researching, and the small cafe where students gathered for intense discussions that often continued long after formal seminars had ended. "It's like a movie version of what college should be," Eliana remarked as we passed a group of students engaged in animated debate on the main lawn. "All this history and serious academic purpose." "The intensity can be overwhelming sometimes," I acknowledged. "But there's something energizing about being surrounded by people who care deeply about ideas and their real-world applications." When we reached the International Affairs building that housed Professor Vasquez's office, I hesitated briefly before suggesting, "Would you like to see where I work on the research project? Professor Vasquez mentioned she might be in her office this morning finishing some paperwork." My mother immediately agreed. "We'd love to meet her. She sounds remarkable from your emails." To my relief, Professor Vasquez was indeed in her office and graciously welcomed my family. With her characteristic directness tempered by warm professionalism, she engaged my parents in conversation about the research project while subtly emphasizing my contributions. "Olivia's perspective has proven invaluable," she told them. "Her ability to anticipate implementation challenges based on her healthcare experience has already helped us refine several policy recommendations that might otherwise have failed in practical application." I watched my parents absorb this assessment from a distinguished academic authority, confirmation from an unbiased source that their daughter had developed significant expertise. My father, particularly, seemed affected by the professor's evaluation, nodding with visible pride that lacked his usual qualification or comparison. As we left the building, he touched my arm lightly. "Your professor is impressive," he said, "but I'm more impressed by how confidently you navigate this world. It suits you, Olivia." The simple acknowledgement, delivered without reference to alternative paths or comparisons to Eliana's achievements, felt like a breakthrough in our reconstructed relationship. He was seeing me clearly, perhaps for the first time, as the person I had become rather than the daughter whose trajectory had diverged from his expectations. Lunch with May further illuminated aspects of my daily life for my family. My roommate, charmed them with her economist's analytical perspective on everything from DC restaurant pricing strategies to the optimal ratio of studying to networking and graduate school success. "Olivia maintains the perfect balance," she informed my parents. "Academically rigorous without becoming isolated. It's mathematically elegant." "That sounds like Liv," Eliana agreed. "She's always been methodical. Even as a kid, she approached everything with a plan." "Some things don't change," I acknowledged, "though the plans have certainly evolved." That evening, after a full day of exploration that left Noah thoroughly exhausted and the adults pleasantly fatigued, my parents invited me to join them for a nightcap in their hotel lobby while Eliana put Noah to bed. The space was quietly elegant, with subdued lighting and comfortable seating arranged to facilitate conversation. "This visit has been illuminating," my father began after we had settled with our drinks. "Sparkling water for me, a glass of Cabernet for my mother, and Scotch neat for him. Seeing where you live, meeting your colleagues, understanding the substance of your work, it makes your journey more concrete somehow." "I wanted you to see it," I admitted, "not just hear about it from a distance." My mother reached for my hand. "We're seeing more than just your academic life, Olivia. We're seeing who you've become, someone remarkable. And we recognize that you became this person without our support," my father added quietly, "perhaps even despite our actions." The frank acknowledgement hung in the air between us, not accusatory, but honest in a way our previous conversations had not fully achieved. For the first time, my father was directly addressing the reality that his decisions had created obstacles rather than opportunities in my path. "I built the life I wanted," I said finally, "through means I wouldn't have chosen initially, but the outcome has proven valuable in unexpected ways." "Your resilience is extraordinary," my mother said, her eyes bright with emotion. "But I wish you hadn't needed quite so much of it." The conversation that followed was perhaps the most authentic we had ever shared, a thoughtful exploration of how our family dynamic had shaped each of us, for better and worse. My parents spoke of realizations that had come gradually after my departure for Georgetown, reflections on patterns of favoritism they hadn't fully recognized until confronted with their consequences, assumptions about my self-sufficiency that had justified their unequal distribution of resources and attention. "We mistook your capability for not needing us," my father explained, vulnerability evident in his typically confident voice. "Eliana's expressiveness demanded response, while your quiet determination seemed to require less support." "A fundamental misreading," I observed without bitterness. "One with real consequences," he acknowledged. "Consequences we can never fully repair, though we'd like to try." As our conversation concluded, I felt a subtle but significant shift in my emotional landscape. Not complete resolution, but a kind of clarifying acceptance. My parents had failed me in important ways, yet they were capable of recognizing that failure and seeking to build something new from its aftermath. The acknowledgement didn't erase the past, but it created space for a different future. Walking back to my apartment later that night, I reflected on how dramatically my perspective had evolved in recent months. The anger that had once fueled my determination had gradually transformed into something more nuanced, a clear-eyed assessment of both what had been lost and what had been gained through my unexpected journey. What remained was not resentment, but a powerful sense of self-authorship, the knowledge that regardless of external circumstances or others' decisions, I possessed the capacity to shape my own path forward. That certainty, hard-won through years of solitary striving, represented a form of freedom I might never have discovered on an easier road. As the fall semester concluded and winter break approached, the research team's work intensified. Professor Vasquez announced during our mid-December meeting that the World Health Organization had scheduled an international symposium on elder care policy for March in Geneva, Switzerland. Our team's preliminary findings had attracted sufficient interest to warrant a presentation slot at this prestigious gathering. This is a significant opportunity to influence emerging policy frameworks, Professor Vasquez explained as we reviewed the symposium agenda. The WHO is revising its global guidelines on cross-cultural approaches to aging populations. Our research directly addresses several key areas they've identified as priorities. Dr. Abayomi, joining our meeting via video conference from his office in Geneva, elaborated on the strategic importance of our participation. The symposium will include health ministers and policy directors from 37 countries. Recommendations presented there have a high probability of incorporation into national healthcare planning, particularly in developing regions seeking to establish new elder care infrastructure. Professor Vasquez turned her attention to Javier and me. I'd like both research assistants to attend the symposium. Javier will focus on the economic analysis portion, while Olivia will address implementation considerations based on her healthcare experience and policy analysis. The implication registered immediately. I would be presenting our research to an audience of international health officials and policy experts. The prospect was simultaneously thrilling and intimidating, a remarkable opportunity that would require extensive preparation. The university will cover your travel expenses, Professor Vasquez continued. We'll need to begin developing the presentation framework immediately, with final materials completed by early February, for review by the symposium committee. After the meeting, I remained in the conference room, processing this unexpected development. Dr. Abayomi, still connected via video, observed my expression with understanding. Your first major international presentation can be daunting, he acknowledged, but Professor Vasquez wouldn't have suggested your participation if she didn't believe you were ready. I appreciate her confidence, I replied, organizing my notes methodically to calm my racing thoughts. The opportunity is extraordinary. I just want to ensure I represent our research effectively. Your practical expertise adds credibility to our theoretical framework, Dr. Abayomi noted. Many policy conferences feature presenters with impressive academic credentials but limited real-world experience. Your background bridges that gap in a way that resonates with practitioners. His encouragement reinforced what I was gradually coming to recognize. My unconventional path to Georgetown, the years of hands-on healthcare work that had once seemed like merely a means to an end, had become a unique professional asset. The very detour I had resented had equipped me with insights that distinguished me from peers with more traditional academic trajectories. That evening, I shared the news with May over dinner. Her reaction combined analytical assessment with genuine excitement. Presenting at a WHO symposium as a first-year graduate student is statistically improbable, she observed, reaching for her laptop to research the conference's significance. This represents a 98th percentile opportunity based on academic career progression models. I believe that translates to extremely rare in non-economist language, I said with a smile. Precisely. She scrolled through the WHO website, reviewing previous symposium proceedings. Participants from the last Elder Care Policy Conference included 3 Nobel laureates in medicine and economics. The networking potential alone is extraordinary. The preparation will be intense, I noted, mentally calculating how my winter break plans would need to adjust. Professor Vasquez wants a draft presentation framework by the first week of January. You'll need to inform your family, May pointed out practically. This will affect your scheduled visit home for the holidays. She was right. I had planned to spend a week in Boston during the break, my first extended visit since departing for Georgetown. The conference preparation would necessarily shorten that time, a change that required explanation. Later that evening, I called my parents to share the news. My father answered, his voice warming noticeably when he recognized mine. Olivia, your mother and I were just discussing final arrangements for your visit. Eliana wants to host a dinner the night you arrive. Apparently, Noah has prepared a special dinosaur presentation in your honor." "That sounds wonderful," I said, genuinely touched by my nephew's thoughtfulness. "But I need to adjust my plans slightly. Something unexpected has come up with the research project." I explained the symposium invitation and its significance, careful to balance professional details with the personal implications for our holiday plans. "I'll still come home, but I'll need to return to D.C. earlier than planned to prepare my presentation materials." My father's response surprised me with its immediate understanding. "Of course you need to prioritize this opportunity. It sounds extraordinary." There was a brief pause before he added, "Your mother and I were reading about the WHO's influence on international healthcare policy just last week. To think our daughter will be presenting there." The pride in his voice was evident and unqualified, not comparative or conditional as it might once have been, but straightforward appreciation of my achievement on its own terms. "It's somewhat intimidating," I admitted, allowing myself a vulnerability I rarely expressed with my father. "These are leading experts in global health governance, and they'll be hearing from someone with both academic understanding and practical experience," he replied with unexpected insight. "That combination is surprisingly rare in policy circles, Olivia. I've seen it in my corporate foundation work. Brilliant theoreticians who've never witnessed how their proposals function in real-world conditions." His perspective mirrored Dr. Abayomi's assessment so closely that I momentarily wondered if they had somehow coordinated their encouragement. But the similarity simply reflected a truth I was gradually internalizing. My professional value derived not just from academic credentials or practical experience separately, but from the unique integration of both. When I arrived in Boston for my abbreviated holiday visit, I found my family had reorganized their plans to accommodate my revised schedule. Eliana had moved her dinner to my first evening. My mother had consolidated various relatives' visits to maximize our time together, and my father had cleared his typically busy calendar entirely for the days I would be home. "We've created an efficient family interaction matrix," Eliana joked as she explained the adjusted arrangements. "May would approve of our optimization strategy." Noah's dinosaur presentation, delivered with the solemn authority only a 4-year-old paleontology enthusiast can muster, provided a delightful beginning to our family gathering. He had created elaborate drawings of his favorite prehistoric creatures, complete with scientific facts that blended actual information with imaginative embellishments. "T-Rex had the strongest jaws of any dinosaur," he informed us seriously, "and they could run faster than cars, but only when chasing their favorite food." "What was their favorite food?" I asked, playing my designated role as the audience scientific expert. "Pizza," he declared with absolute conviction. "But only pepperoni, not vegetable." The adults managed to maintain appropriately serious expressions during this dubious paleontological claim, though Eliana's suppressed laughter was visible in her shoulders' slight shaking. After Noah's presentation and a dinner filled with relaxed conversation, my father invited me to his home office, a space I had rarely entered during my years living at home. The room reflected his methodical personality: carefully organized bookshelves, a substantial desk with everything arranged at precise angles, and walls displaying his professional achievements alongside family photographs. "I've been doing some reading about the World Health Organization's elder care initiatives," he said, gesturing to several printed reports on his desk. "Fascinating policy challenges, particularly regarding population aging in countries with different cultural approaches to family obligation." I examined the materials with surprise. These are substantive policy documents, not just general overviews. "I wanted to understand the context of your work," he explained. "It's helped me appreciate the significance of your research team's contribution." He hesitated briefly before continuing. "I've realized how little I understood about your academic interests all these years. I had categorized international relations as a vague, impractical field, an unfair assessment based on ignorance rather than understanding. His candid self-criticism reflected a humility I had rarely witnessed in him. Throughout my childhood and young adulthood, my father had projected unwavering confidence in his judgments, particularly regarding educational and career pathways. This acknowledgement of limited perspective represented significant personal growth. "What changed your view?" I asked, genuinely curious about his evolution. "Several things," he replied thoughtfully. "Seeing you in your academic environment during our Washington visit, certainly. Reading the materials you recommended, but mostly recognizing that my daughter is contributing to policy frameworks that will affect millions of people's lives, work, with tangible, meaningful impact that I had failed to recognize as valuable." Our conversation expanded to include specific aspects of the research project, with my father asking insightful questions that revealed his genuine engagement with the subject matter. He had moved beyond superficial interest into substantive understanding. Not comprehensive, certainly, but thoughtful in ways that allowed meaningful exchange of ideas. When I returned to Washington after the abbreviated holiday visit, I carried with me not just renewed family connections, but a strengthened sense of professional purpose. The upcoming WHO symposium represented an opportunity to contribute meaningfully to a field I cared deeply about, drawing on my unique combination of academic training and practical experience. January passed in a blur of intensive preparation. Professor Vasquez maintained exacting standards for our presentation materials, requiring multiple revisions of each section to achieve the precision and clarity essential for an international audience. Javier and I often worked late into the evening, refining economic projections and implementation frameworks until they seamlessly integrated into a compelling policy narrative. "The key is balancing theoretical rigor with practical application," Professor Vasquez reminded us during one particularly challenging revision session. "These aren't abstract academic exercises, they're blueprints for systems that will care for vulnerable populations across diverse cultural contexts." By early February, our presentation had taken final form, a comprehensive analysis of how elder care policies could be structured to accommodate diverse cultural values while maintaining consistent quality standards. My section focused specifically on healthcare delivery mechanisms that could adapt to different family structures and community resources without compromising fundamental care principles. As the symposium approached, I maintained regular contact with my family, sharing updates on our progress and the growing significance of our research in WHO planning discussions. Their interest remained consistent and genuine, with my father occasionally sending relevant articles he encountered in his ongoing education about global health governance. One evening in late February, as I reviewed my presentation notes for perhaps the 20th time, I received an unexpected email from my mother. "Dear Olivia, your father and I have been discussing how we might support your work at the WHO symposium. We know you don't need financial assistance thanks to the university's travel funding, but we wondered if our presence might be meaningful to you. We've looked into flights and accommodations in Geneva during the conference dates. If you would, welcome our attendance at your presentation. We would be honored to be there. If you prefer to focus entirely on your professional responsibilities without family considerations, we completely understand. This is your moment. We want to respect whatever would make it most successful and meaningful for you. With love and admiration, Mom." The offer touched me deeply. Not just the gesture itself, but the careful respect for my autonomy embedded within it. My parents were not assuming their presence was desired or appropriate. They were explicitly acknowledging that this professional milestone belonged to me, with my preferences paramount. After thoughtful consideration, I composed my response. "Mom and Dad, I'm moved by your offer to attend the symposium. Having you there would indeed be meaningful, not because I need support, but because sharing this milestone with you feels right. The journey to this point has been complex for all of us, and your presence would represent how far we've come in understanding each other. If you're serious about making the trip, I would welcome seeing you in Geneva. My presentation is scheduled for March 15th at 2:00 p.m. Professor Vasquez has contacts who could help arrange observer passes for the session. With appreciation, Olivia. Their swift, enthusiastic confirmation settled the matter. My parents would witness firsthand as I presented research to international health officials, a professional achievement that would have been impossible had they fulfilled their original commitment to fund my education immediately after high school. The irony wasn't lost on me. Their failure to support my initial educational path had ultimately led to experiences that enhanced my eventual academic contributions. What had once seemed like an insurmountable setback had become, through my own persistent efforts, the foundation for distinctive professional capabilities. As I prepared for the international stage that awaited me, I reflected on the symmetry of the situation. 6 years ago, standing in my parents' kitchen as they explained why my education would be sacrificed for my sister's wedding, I had felt powerless. Now, that same sacrifice had indirectly equipped me with the unique perspective that made my research valuable to global health authorities. The transformation was not what anyone had intended, yet it had produced something more valuable than the original plan, a reminder that while we cannot control all circumstances, we retain the power to create meaning from whatever materials life provides. Geneva welcomed me with snow-dusted mountains visible in the distance and the placid waters of Lake Geneva reflecting a bright March sky. The city embodied international diplomacy, elegant, precise, and deliberately neutral in its aesthetic. The World Health Organization headquarters, a striking modernist structure with its distinctive circular design, projected an aura of global purpose that matched its mission. Professor Vasquez, Javier, and I arrived 2 days before our scheduled presentation to acclimate to the time difference and participate in preliminary conference sessions. The WHO complex bustled with health officials, policy experts, and delegates from dozens of countries, their conversations forming a multilingual backdrop to the formal proceedings. "Remember that you belong here," Professor Vasquez advised as we collected our credentials at the registration desk. "Your work has earned you a place at this table. Many of these officials have spent decades in bureaucratic roles with limited, direct healthcare experience. Your practical perspective provides value they cannot." Her words bolstered my confidence as we navigated the expansive building toward the opening plenary session. The conference hall filled with representatives from international health organizations, government ministries, and academic institutions. A global assembly of expertise gathered to address the growing challenges of aging populations worldwide. Dr. Marcus Abayomi spotted us entering and made his way through the crowd to greet us. His familiar presence amid the sea of strangers provided welcome orientation to the complex social dynamics of international conferences. "Our research team from Georgetown," he announced to the colleagues accompanying him. "Their work on culturally adaptive implementation frameworks has generated significant interest among several national delegations." He introduced us to health ministers from Singapore, Kenya, and Denmark, each leading their country's efforts to develop sustainable elder care systems appropriate to their distinct cultural contexts. The ministers asked incisive questions about our methodology and findings, engaging with our responses at a level that confirmed the relevance of our work to their practical challenges. "Your background in direct patient care is particularly valuable," noted Dr. Amara Ose, Kenya's Deputy Minister of Health. "Many policy frameworks fail because they're designed by those who have never witnessed the realities of healthcare delivery in resource-limited settings." As we continued these preliminary discussions, I observed the complex interplay of diplomatic protocol, scientific discourse, and political considerations that characterized international policy development. Negotiations occurred not just in formal sessions, but in hallway conversations, shared meals, and carefully orchestrated social events. Professor Vasquez navigated these dynamics with practiced ease, strategically introducing Javier and me to influential figures whose support might advance our policy recommendations. My parents arrived that evening, texting me from their hotel near the diplomatic quarter. While the following day would be consumed by conference preparations, I arranged to meet them for breakfast at a cafe overlooking the lake. The setting, a city far from our familiar contexts, with the Alps visible across the water, seemed fitting for this new phase of our relationship. "Olivia!" My mother spotted me first as I entered the cafe, rising from their table by the window. Her embrace conveyed genuine delight at seeing me in this international setting. My father followed with a warm handshake that evolved into an uncharacteristic hug. "You look like you belong here," he observed as we settled at the table. "There's a confidence in how you carry yourself, different from when we visited Georgetown." "The conference environment is surprisingly comfortable," I admitted. "The substantive work feels familiar after months of preparation." "We attended an economic policy conference in Brussels last year as part of a corporate delegation," my father explained. "The formality and diplomatic protocols were quite intimidating. I'm impressed by how naturally you seem to engage with." You went over coffee and European breakfast pastries. I described our first day at the WHO, the preliminary meetings, the international delegates who had expressed interest in our research, the complex scheduling of formal sessions and informal consultations. Professor Vasquez mentioned that several country delegations have requested private briefings after our presentation, I explained. They're particularly interested in how our frameworks might be adapted to their specific healthcare systems. "That's extraordinary impact for a research project," my mother noted. "To think that your work might directly influence how nations care for their elderly populations." "It's preliminary influence," I cautioned. "Policy implementation takes time, particularly at international scales. But having a seat at the table during the formative discussions is significant." My father, who had been listening intently, asked, "How many of the other presenters have your combination of academic training and direct healthcare experience?" "Very few," I acknowledged. "Most are career academics or health ministry officials with administrative backgrounds. Some of the physicians presenting have clinical expertise but limited policy experience." "Which is precisely why your perspective matters," he concluded. "You're bridging theory and practice in ways many cannot." His observation aligned with what Professor Vasquez and Dr. Abayomi had emphasized repeatedly. My unconventional career path had created distinctive capabilities that distinguished my contributions. The years I had once viewed primarily as delayed progress toward my real career had become the very foundation of my professional value. After breakfast, my parents accompanied me to the WHO headquarters, where Professor Vasquez had arranged visitor passes allowing them to attend our presentation session. As we approached the imposing building, I felt a curious inversion of our traditional family dynamic. I was now the guide leading them into my professional world, rather than the daughter following their direction. "We'll see you this afternoon," my mother said as we separated at the security checkpoint. "We couldn't be prouder, Olivia." The hours before our presentation passed in focused preparation. Javier and I reviewed our slides one final time, confirming the seamless transition between his economic analysis and my implementation frameworks. Professor Vasquez conducted a brief rehearsal in a small meeting room, offering last-minute refinements to our delivery. "Remember that many in the audience are not native English speakers," she advised. "Clear articulation and deliberate pacing are essential. The simultaneous translation team needs to keep pace with your presentation." Dr. Abayomi joined us for a quick lunch in the WHO cafeteria, providing updates on which delegates had confirmed attendance at our session. "The Japanese and South Korean representatives are particularly interested in your cultural adaptation matrices," he told me. "Both countries face rapidly aging populations with strong traditional family care expectations that are increasingly difficult to maintain in their modern economic structures." As the designated presentation time approached, we made our way to the assigned conference room. Unlike the massive plenary hall, This was a medium-sized chamber designed for specialized sessions. Approximately 60 delegates had gathered, representing a global cross-section of health ministries, international organizations, and academic institutions. Professor Vasquez opened with a concise overview of our research objectives and methodology, establishing the context for our detailed findings. Javier followed with his economic analysis, presenting elegant data visualizations that illustrated the fiscal implications of various policy approaches across different healthcare systems. When my turn came, I stepped to the podium with calm focus, surveying the room briefly before beginning. My parents sat near the back, their expressions attentive but carefully neutral, present as observers rather than attempting to influence the professional dynamic. Implementation frameworks must balance universal quality standards with cultural specificity, I began, my voice steady and clear. Our research identifies 5 critical adaptation points where elder care systems can maintain consistent quality outcomes while accommodating diverse cultural values. As I advanced through the presentation, explaining how care delivery mechanisms could flex to accommodate different family structures, community resources, and cultural expectations regarding filial responsibility, I drew extensively on specific examples from my healthcare experience. These concrete illustrations, anonymous but authentic cases that demonstrated both successful adaptations and problematic misalignments, brought theoretical concepts into sharp practical focus. When healthcare systems impose standardized approaches, without cultural adaptation, we observe predictable points of resistance and implementation failure, I explained, displaying a matrix that mapped these friction points across different healthcare models. However, when systems incorporate these 5 adaptation mechanisms, implementation success rates improve by an average of 63% across diverse cultural contexts. The audience's engagement was evident in their focused attention and note-taking. When I concluded my portion of the presentation, Professor Vasquez returned to the podium for our summary and policy recommendations. The question period that followed was robust and substantive, with delegates probing specific aspects of our methodology and findings. A representative from Japan's Ministry of Health raised his hand. Ms. Chen, your implementation matrix suggests that community-based support structures can partially substitute for traditional family care while maintaining cultural continuity. Could you elaborate on how this might function in societies with strong filial piety traditions? The question addressed precisely the intersection of my academic knowledge and practical experience. I explained how community care models could be structured to preserve the relational elements of filial piety while redistributing functional caregiving responsibilities, drawing on specific cases I had witnessed with East Asian immigrant families navigating American healthcare systems. The key distinction, I concluded, is between cultural values and specific implementation mechanisms. By preserving the core values of respect, honor, and intergenerational responsibility, while adapting the practical delivery mechanisms to contemporary realities, we maintain cultural integrity while ensuring sustainable care systems. The Japanese delegate nodded with evident appreciation. This nuanced approach deserves further exploration. Our ministry would welcome more detailed discussion of potential applications in our national context. Several similar exchanges followed, with delegates from various countries requesting follow-up consultations on specific aspects of our research relevant to their national circumstances. By the session's conclusion, Professor Vasquez had scheduled 5 private briefings with country delegations for the following day. As the formal session ended and attendees began networking conversations, I noticed my parents speaking with Dr. Abayomi near the back of the room. They appeared engaged in substantive discussion rather than mere pleasantries, with my father gesturing in a way that suggested genuine intellectual engagement with the subject matter. Professor Vasquez touched my arm lightly. Your presentation was excellent, Olivia. Clear, authoritative, and precisely calibrated to this audience. Several delegates have specifically mentioned the value of your implementation insights. Thank you for the opportunity to contribute, I replied sincerely. You've earned your place at this table, she said firmly. Remember that as we move into the delegation briefings, your perspective adds unique value to these policy discussions. As the room gradually emptied, my parents approached, accompanied by Dr. Abayomi, who excused himself after brief congratulations. Their expressions conveyed a complex mixture of pride, admiration, and something deeper, perhaps a new understanding of who I had become. That was remarkable, Olivia, my father said without preamble. The confidence, the command of the material, the way you engaged with complex questions. I've attended hundreds of professional presentations, and yours stands among the most impressive. The delegates clearly respected your expertise, my mother added. We overheard several mentioning how valuable your practical healthcare perspective was to the discussion. Their observations, while gratifying, mattered less than what I had experienced myself during the presentation. A profound sense of professional alignment, of bringing my full capabilities to work of genuine significance. The path to this moment had been neither direct nor easy, but standing at that international podium, I had felt the rightness of where my journey had led. Dr. Abayomi invited us to the reception this evening, my father mentioned. He said family members of key presenters are welcome. We'll understand if you'd prefer to focus on professional networking without us there. The consideration in his offer, the careful respect for my professional boundaries, reflected how fundamentally our relationship had evolved. Where once, he might have assumed parental privilege to attend regardless of my preference, he now recognized my autonomy in this professional context. I'd like you to come, I said sincerely. This is part of my world now, and sharing it with you feels appropriate. That evening's reception in the WHO's elegant atrium offered a less formal environment for continued discussion of the day's presentations. Delegates mingled over canapes and beverages, forming and reforming conversation groups as they explored potential collaborations and policy alignments. Professor Vasquez skillfully facilitated introductions, ensuring Javier and I connected with officials whose interests aligned with our research specialties. My parents observed this professional choreography with evident fascination, occasionally joining conversations when invited but primarily witnessing rather than participating, a role reversal from our traditional family dynamic. As the evening progressed, I found myself in conversation with representatives from the European Commission's Health Directorate, discussing how our cultural adaptation frameworks might inform their ongoing efforts to harmonize elder care standards across member states with diverse traditions. The challenge is maintaining cultural appropriateness while ensuring consistent quality, explained Dr. Sophie Laurent, the Commission's senior health policy advisor. Your research offers promising approaches to this balance. The key is identifying which elements require standardization for quality purposes and which can flex for cultural alignment, I responded, drawing on specific examples from our research. As our discussion continued, I noticed my father engaged in separate conversation with a WHO official, their interaction suggesting substantive exchange rather than mere social pleasantry. My mother had been drawn into discussion with a delegate from Singapore, apparently sharing perspectives on community-based elder care initiatives. The scene represented a profound transformation from where our family relationships had stood just months earlier. My parents engaging thoughtfully with my professional world, respecting the expertise I had developed, contributing where appropriate, without attempting to direct or overshadow. Later that evening, as the reception concluded and we prepared to part ways until the following day, my father made an observation that captured this evolution perfectly. I've attended countless professional events over my career, he said quietly. But I've never been prouder than watching you today, Olivia. Not just because of the achievement itself, but because of how you created it. Through determination and resilience I couldn't have imagined when you were growing up. His words acknowledged not just my professional accomplishment, but the character development that had made it possible. Qualities forged through necessity when the support I had expected wasn't provided. In that acknowledgement lay perhaps the most meaningful recognition that my greatest strengths had emerged from navigating the very challenges their actions had created. The symmetry was both ironic and profound. Their redirection of my college fund to Eliana's wedding had forced me to develop the very qualities and experiences that now distinguished my professional contributions. What had begun as a painful detour had become, through my own persistent efforts, the foundation for unique capabilities that opened doors at the highest levels of international policy development. As I returned to my hotel that night, Geneva's lights reflecting on the lake's dark surface, I felt a deep sense of alignment between my past struggles and present opportunities. The path had been neither direct nor easy, but it had led to a destination more meaningful than my original plans could have anticipated. A reminder that our greatest setbacks sometimes contain the seeds of our most significant growth. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.